The silence of space held secrets that the Arxelian Dominion had never bothered to uncover. In the grand crystalline halls of their war council, High Commander Zelthak stood before a holographic display of the galaxy, his angular body refracting the light of 1,000 conquered stars. Each point of light represented a system under their control, a civilization brought to heel, a species that had learned to kneel before the Dominion's might. "The outer rim sectors are nearly complete," reported Subcommander Irix, her crystalline voice chiming like broken glass. "Only 3 systems remain untouched in Sector 779. Zelthax's faceted eyes studied the map with satisfaction. The Dominion had been expanding for over a millennium now, and in all that time they had never encountered meaningful resistance. Species either surrendered immediately or were crushed within solar cycles. It was the natural order of things. The strong ruled, and the Arxelians were the strongest. "What of the historical database?" Zelthax asked. "Have we catalogued the extinct species in that sector?" Irix manipulated the display, pulling up ancient records that the Dominion had collected from various sources across the galaxy. One file expanded before them, marked with a red symbol that indicated complete extinction. The label read, "Humanity, the First Fallen." According to multiple independent sources, this species destroyed itself approximately 2,800 years ago, Irix explained. "Nuclear warfare, ecological collapse, resource depletion. The standard pattern of primitive species that gain technology before wisdom." Zelthax studied the file with mild interest. The humans had been bipedal, carbon-based, remarkably fragile by galactic standards. Their homeworld, listed as Earth in Sector 779, had been located in what they called the Sol system. The file contained fragmented records, artistic works, and technological specifications that suggested a species barely capable of basic space travel before their demise. "Fitting that we should claim their dead worlds," Zelthax said. "Let it serve as a reminder to others. Evolution favors the strong." The Dominion fleet moved into Sector 779 3 cycles later. 12 massive warships, each the size of a small moon, capable of reducing planets to molten slag. It was standard procedure for claiming empty systems. They would survey, extract resources, and move on. Captain Vornex commanded the lead vessel, the Eternal Dominance. As they entered the sector, he initiated standard scanning protocols. The system appeared exactly as described in the ancient records. A yellow star, several planets in varying orbits, asteroid fields, the remnants of what might have once been industrial stations, now reduced to cosmic debris. "Nothing lives here," reported his scanning officer. "Radiation signatures consistent with ancient nuclear exchange on the 3rd planet. Atmosphere recovering but still toxic in many regions. No electromagnetic emissions, no heat signatures, no signs of civilization." Vornex nodded, preparing to authorize mining operations. But then something unusual appeared on the sensors. A small satellite, ancient by any measure, drifting in a distant orbit. Its design was crude, almost laughably primitive, but it was still transmitting. "Bring that artifact aboard," Vornex ordered. "It may contain historical data worth cataloging." The satellite was small, barely larger than an Arxelian soldier. Its metal hull was pitted and scarred from millennia of micrometeor impacts. But when the Dominion's technicians connected to its systems, they found its data core intact, protected by layers of shielding that seemed excessive for such a simple device. The files within were a treasure trove of human history. Videos of their cities, their wars, their art, their final days. The technicians watched footage of mushroom clouds rising over population centers, of riots and chaos, of desperate shuttles fleeing a dying world. The last transmission was dated Earth year 2157, a haggard human face staring into a camera, saying words in their primitive language that the Dominion's computers translated as, "We failed. May whatever finds this learn from our mistakes." Vornex reviewed the data with the detached interest of a historian examining fossils. The humans had been emotional, violent, self-destructive. Their extinction was inevitable. He prepared his report for High Command, recommending the sector be opened for resource extraction. But then the alarm screamed. In the depths of the asteroid field, something had activated. Energy signatures blazed across every scanner simultaneously. Not the weak, dying signals of ancient technology, but powerful, focused, military-grade systems coming online with frightening coordination. "Multiple contacts," the scanning officer shouted. his crystalline voice cracking with stress. Defensive platforms activating throughout the asteroid field. Energy signatures matching weapons-grade systems. Vornex's confidence evaporated. Defensive platforms? The humans are extinct. These must be automated systems, remnants from their final war. But the patterns were wrong. The systems weren't activating randomly. They were coordinating, moving with purpose, establishing overlapping fields of fire. And then, from behind the third planet's moon, something emerged that made every sensor on the Eternal Dominance scream warnings. A ship, human design, unmistakable from the database records but impossibly intact. It was massive, nearly a third the size of a Dominion warship, built with brutal efficiency rather than elegance. Its hull was scarred and pitted, suggesting unimaginable age, but its power core blazed with active energy. Weapon ports lined its flanks, and as the Dominion fleet watched in stunned silence, they opened like predatory eyes. The vessel's communication systems activated, broadcasting on frequencies the Dominion had learned from the satellite. A voice speaking that same primitive human language filled the void. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, her hands gripping the command console as she stared at the alien vessels before her. She was 34 years old by the calendar of her birth, but she had just awakened from a sleep that had lasted 2,847 years. Her crew, 300 souls who had volunteered to leave everything behind, were still processing the impossible truth that their AI navigator had just delivered. Humanity was supposed to be extinct. Scan complete. Captain, reported Lieutenant Morrison from the sensor station. His voice was steady, but Chen could see his hands shaking. 12 vessels, unknown configuration. Technology significantly more advanced than anything in our database. They're weapons platforms, no question. Chen's jaw tightened. The mission had been simple in concept. Take the Perseverance and its sister ships into deep space. Establish colonies far from Earth's conflicts. Give humanity a second chance if the homeworld destroyed itself. They had left in 2089, just as the resource wars were escalating into nuclear brinkmanship. The cryosleep was supposed to last 500 years, enough time for either peace to emerge or for Earth to burn. They had slept for nearly 3 millennia instead. A malfunction, a cascade failure in the wake-up protocols that the ship's AI had only just managed to repair. What about Earth? Chen asked quietly. Any signals from the homeworld? Morrison checked his readings and his face fell. Radiation signatures consistent with large-scale nuclear exchange. Atmospheric recovery suggests the strikes happened over 2,000 years ago. No electromagnetic emissions, no satellite networks, no signs of civilization. Captain, I think we're alone. The bridge fell silent. 300 people. The last remnants of a dead species facing a galaxy that had moved on without them. Chen felt the weight of it crushing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. But then the tactical officer spoke up, his voice cutting through the despair. Captain, those alien ships are moving into formation. It looks like a standard subjugation pattern based on the spacing. They think we're hostile. Chen's grief transformed into something sharper, something forged in the same fires that had nearly destroyed her species. Humanity might be extinct on Earth, but the Perseverance was still here. Her crew was still here, and she would be damned if they came all this way just to kneel before some alien empire. Activate all defensive systems, she ordered, her voice cold and clear. Charge the railguns, bring our point defense network online, and get me a translation algorithm working on their language. I want to know what they're saying. The Perseverance had been built during the darkest period of human history, when every nation poured their resources into weapons rather than peace. She was a colony ship, yes, but she had been designed to survive the journey through potentially hostile space. Her armor was layered titanium and carbon composite. Her weapons were kinetic kill systems designed to punch through asteroid-sized targets. And her AI had been programmed with every military doctrine humanity had developed over 10,000 years of warfare. On the Dominion flagship, Vornex watched in fascination as the human vessel came alive. Weapons that should have been millennia beyond use powered up with smooth efficiency. The ship maneuvered with precision that suggested advanced automation or a crew with exceptional training. They're not remnants, he said slowly. That ship has an active crew. His second officer turned to him with confusion radiating from every facet. Impossible. The humans are extinct. Every source confirms it. Then we're looking at ghosts, Vornex replied. Very well-armed ghosts. Attempt to establish communication. Standard subjugation protocols. Inform them that they are in Dominion space and must submit to our authority. The message was transmitted, translated through the linguistic algorithms the Dominion had developed over centuries of conquest. On the Perseverance, Chen listened to the mechanical voice delivering its ultimatum with cold fury. "They want us to surrender," Morrison reported. "They're claiming this entire sector as their territory." Chen looked at the view screen, at the massive alien ships that surrounded her vessel. She thought of Earth, silent and dead. She thought of the billions who had died in the fires of their own making. She thought of the 300 people behind her, all that remained of humanity's legacy. "Send them a response," she said. "Tell them that humanity doesn't surrender. Not to anyone. Not ever." The Dominion fleet received the transmission, and for a moment Vornex considered the possibility that these humans might be reasoned with. But then the Perseverance opened fire, and all thoughts of negotiation evaporated. The railguns spoke with thunder that echoed through the void, sending tungsten penetrators screaming across space at a significant fraction of light speed. The Dominion's shields caught the first volley, but the kinetic force was staggering, sending shockwaves through their vessels that made crystalline bodies vibrate in distress. "Return fire," Vornex commanded. "Destroy that vessel." The Dominion's energy weapons blazed, but the Perseverance was already moving, her thrusters firing in patterns that suggested combat maneuvers refined over generations. She wove through the incoming fire with desperate grace, her point defense systems intercepting what she couldn't dodge. Chen gripped her console as the ship shook from near misses. "Target their lead vessel. All weapons, concentrated fire. Show them what happens when you threaten the last of humanity." In that moment, as the battle raged in the graveyard of Earth's orbit, the galaxy received a message it would never forget. Humanity was not extinct. They had been sleeping, waiting, and now they had awakened to find themselves alone in a hostile universe. But being alone had never stopped humanity before, and it certainly wouldn't stop them now. The battle lasted 17 minutes before Captain Chen gave the order to retreat. The Perseverance had survived, but barely. Her shields were failing. Her hull was breached in 3 sections, and they had expended 40% of their ammunition. The Dominion fleet had backed off, clearly shocked that such an ancient vessel could inflict any damage at all. But Chen knew they would regroup and return with overwhelming force. "Get us into the asteroid field," she commanded, her voice steady despite the klaxons blaring throughout the ship. "Use the debris as cover. We need time to think." As the ship limped into the dense field of tumbling rocks and ancient wreckage, Chen allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. They had fired on an alien empire, declared war on a force that clearly controlled significant territory. But what choice did they have? Surrender meant slavery or death, and humanity had come too far to accept either. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," Morrison called from his station. His fingers danced across the controls, confusion written across his face. "There are structures in this asteroid field. Not natural formations. They're artificial, built into the larger rocks. And they're old, really old, but some of them are still active." Chen moved to his station, studying the readouts. He was right. Scattered throughout the field were installations that had been expertly concealed, their energy signatures masked by the natural radiation of the asteroids themselves. They looked like weapons platforms, sensor arrays, maybe even habitats. "Who built them?" she asked. Morrison ran the design patterns through the database, and his face went pale. "Captain, the architectural style matches late 22nd century Earth construction. These are human installations." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. Humans had built these platforms after the nuclear war, which meant someone had survived. Someone had endured the fires that consumed Earth and had built these installations in secret, hiding them from the galaxy's eyes. "Scan the inner system," she ordered. "Earth, Mars, everywhere. Look for any sign that humans survived the war." The sensors swept across the Sol system with desperate intensity. Earth appeared dead from orbit, its electromagnetic spectrum silent, its cities dark. But as the scans penetrated deeper, analyzing underground structures and shielded installations, a different picture emerged. There were power sources beneath the surface, geothermal plants buried kilometers deep, fusion reactors shielded by layers of rock and lead, and there were heat signatures consistent with habitation, carefully masked but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "My God," Morrison whispered. "Captain, there are people down there. Not many, but they're there. Underground cities on Earth. installations on Mars and Europa. The radiation signature suggests they've been there for thousands of years. Chen's hands trembled as she gripped the console. Humanity wasn't extinct. They had survived. But they had gone dark, hiding from the galaxy like prey hiding from predators. And they had been hiding successfully for nearly 3 millennia. Attempt contact, she said. Use old Earth frequencies, pre-war protocols. Let them know we're human, that we came from the Exodus fleet. The communication officer worked for several minutes, cycling through ancient frequencies that hadn't been used in thousands of years. Then suddenly a response came through. It was encrypted with code so old that the ship's AI had to dig through historical archives to decode them. When the translation came through, a voice spoke in English that sounded almost alien after so many centuries of linguistic drift. Unidentified vessel, this is Earth Defense Command. Authenticate your identity or be destroyed. You have 30 seconds. Chen grabbed the microphone, her heart pounding. Earth Defense Command. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the colony ship Perseverance, Exodus Fleet Designation Alpha 7. We departed Earth in 2089 under the International Colony Initiative. Authentication code Zulu Victor 339. We've been in cryosleep for over 2,000 years. Please respond. There was a long silence. Then the voice returned, and this time there was emotion in it. Wonder, disbelief, and something that might have been joy. Perseverance authentication confirmed. Stand by for priority transmission. Welcome home, Captain. We thought you were lost forever. Over the next hours, the truth emerged in fragmented communications and data transfers that felt like drinking from a fire hose. The nuclear war had been devastating, just as everyone had feared. Billions died in the initial exchanges. Billions more in the famines and plagues that followed. But humanity's capacity for survival, that stubborn refusal to accept extinction, had prevailed. The survivors had retreated underground, building cities in caverns and abandoned mines. They had learned to live in silence, generating no electromagnetic emissions that might attract attention from space. They had watched and waited as alien civilizations rose and fell, as the galaxy moved on without them. They called themselves the Remnant. Commander David Park led the Remnant's military council from a command center 3 kilometers beneath what had once been Seoul. He was 62 years old, born underground, and had never seen the surface except through sealed suits and filtered images. His great-great-grandmother had survived the fires, and her stories had been passed down through generations like sacred texts. Captain Chen, Park said via the encrypted channel, his face appearing on the Perseverance's main screen. You've created a serious problem. The Dominion knows humans exist now. They'll come back with more ships, more weapons. Our strategy has always been invisibility. You've compromised that. Chen felt anger flash through her. Your strategy was hiding while aliens claimed Earth as their territory. We came home to find our species extinct and enemies at our doorstep. What were we supposed to do, surrender? Park's expression softened slightly. No, you did what any human would do. You fought, and now we all have to deal with the consequences. He paused, then continued. How many ships in your fleet? Just the Perseverance, Chen admitted. The other colony ships were supposed to wake at different intervals. We suffered a malfunction. For all we know, we're the only one that survived the journey. Then you brought 300 people home, Park said. That might not sound like much, but our entire population is only 50 million, scattered across 3 worlds. Genetic diversity is our biggest challenge. You represent hope for our future, Captain. Chen absorbed this number. 50 million humans, all that remained of a species that had once numbered in the billions. It was a miracle they had survived at all. What about the Dominion? She asked. What do we know about them? Park's face grew grim. We've been listening to their communications for the last 1,000 years. They're an empire, pure and simple. Conquest, subjugation, expansion. They've absorbed hundreds of species into their territory, some willingly, most by force. They believe in hierarchy, in the natural superiority of the strong over the weak. Then they don't understand humanity at all, Chen said. Park smiled, and there was something predatory in it. No, Captain. They don't. They think we're extinct primitives who got lucky with one old warship. They're about to learn a very painful lesson. He transmitted a data package to the Perseverance, and as Chen reviewed it, her eyes widened. The Remnant hadn't been idle during their millennia underground. They had been building, researching, preparing. They had weapons that made the Perseverance's arsenal look like children's toys, railguns that could punch through planetary crust, missiles carrying fusion warheads, point defense systems that could track and destroy thousands of incoming targets simultaneously. But more than that, they had been studying warfare. Every conflict in human history had been analyzed, dissected, and learned from. The tactics that had worked, the strategies that had failed, the psychology of combat. The remnant had taken 10,000 years of human military knowledge and refined it into something terrifying. We knew this day would come, Park explained. We knew that eventually someone would find us. So we prepared. Every human in the remnant receives military training. Every installation is a fortress. Every city has weapons that could level an army. We've spent 3,000 years getting ready for war. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. The Dominion thought they were facing the last remnants of a dead species. They had no idea they were about to fight humans who had spent millennia preparing for this exact moment. "What's the plan?" she asked. Park's smile grew wider. "The Dominion fleet will return in approximately 40 hours, according to their communication patterns. They'll expect to find a crippled colony ship in dead worlds. Instead, they're going to find something they've never encountered before." "What's that?" "Humans who have nothing left to lose." The next day was spent in frantic preparation. The Perseverance docked at a hidden station buried inside one of the larger asteroids, where remnant engineers swarmed over her hull, repairing damage and upgrading systems with technology that made Chen's head spin. Her crew was briefed on the situation, and to their credit, they adapted quickly. They had volunteered to leave Earth behind once. They could volunteer to defend it now. Meanwhile, throughout the Sol system, the remnant activated systems that had been dormant for centuries. Weapons platforms emerged from their hiding places in the asteroid field. Defense satellites powered up in Earth's orbit. On Mars, massive railguns concealed in Olympus Mons began their targeting calculations. On Europa, beneath kilometers of ice, missile silos opened to the void. The Dominion had cataloged this system as dead. They were about to discover how wrong they were. High Commander Zelthak studied the reports from Captain Vornex with growing irritation. A single ancient human vessel had damaged 3 Dominion warships and escaped. It was embarrassing. More than that, it was unacceptable. "You will return with the subjugation fleet," Zelthax commanded. 500 vessels. Enough to reduce every rock in that system to dust if necessary. Find these humans wherever they're hiding and eliminate them. The Dominion does not tolerate resistance. Vornex bowed his crystalline head. "It will be done, High Commander. The humans will be extinct within a solar cycle." But as the Dominion fleet assembled for their return to Sol system, they made a crucial mistake. They assumed they were hunting the last survivors of a dead species. They assumed humans would fight like any other species they had encountered. They assumed that 3,000 years of hiding meant 3,000 years of weakness. They had never been more wrong about anything in their entire history. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, now fully repaired and upgraded with remnant technology. Around her ship, in perfect formation, floated 20 vessels that had emerged from underground hangars on Earth and Mars. They were newer than her ship, built over centuries with careful precision, but they shared the same brutal efficiency of design. "Dominion fleet entering the system," Morrison reported. 500 vessels, same configuration as before, but in much greater numbers. Chen nodded. The numbers were terrifying, but she felt no fear, only determination. "Send the signal," she ordered. Throughout the Sol system, on every frequency the Dominion used, a message broadcast in their language. It was simple, direct, and delivered with absolute conviction. "This is humanity. You are in our home system. Leave now, or learn why we're the only species that nearly destroyed itself and still survived. This is your only warning." On the Dominion flagship, Vornex heard the message and laughed. 500 warships against perhaps 24 human vessels? The outcome was certain. "All ships," he commanded. "Advance and destroy. Show these primitives the price of defiance." The Dominion fleet moved forward, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They were prepared for a fight. They were prepared for resistance. They were not prepared for humans. The Dominion fleet advanced in perfect formation, a wall of crystalline warships that glittered in the light of Earth's sun. Captain Vornex watched the human vessels with contempt. They held their position near the asteroid field, 20 small ships against 500. It would be a slaughter, a demonstration of Dominion superiority that would be recorded in the histories. "Target the lead vessel," Vornex commanded. "We'll destroy their flagship first, break their morale." But before his weapons officer could execute the order, something impossible happened. The human ships vanished, not destroyed, not retreating. They simply disappeared from every sensor, every scanner, every detection system the Dominion possessed. One moment they were there, the next moment the space they occupied was empty. "Report," Fornex demanded, his crystalline voice sharp with confusion. "Unknown, Captain," his sensor officer replied, panic creeping into his tone. "They're gone. No energy signatures, no mass readings, nothing. It's as if they never existed." Fornex felt unease creeping through his consciousness. In 1,000 years of Dominion expansion, they had never encountered technology that could completely mask a vessel's presence. It defied the known laws of physics. "Continue advance," he ordered, forcing confidence into his voice. "They must be using some kind of primitive cloaking. We'll find them." On the bridge of the Perseverance, Captain Chen watched the Dominion fleet through passive sensors that detected without transmitting. The Remnant's stealth technology was ingenious in its simplicity. It didn't make the ships invisible. It made them look exactly like the asteroids and debris that filled the system. Thermal masking, electromagnetic silence, and hulls coated with material that absorbed sensor waves rather than reflecting them. The Dominion was looking right at them and seeing only rocks. "They're in position." Commander Park's voice came through the encrypted channel. "All defensive platforms ready. Authorization required for weapons release." Chen took a deep breath. What they were about to do would change everything. There would be no going back to hiding, no return to the comfortable shadows. Humanity would announce itself to the galaxy not with words but with violence. "All units," she said quietly. "You are authorized to fire. Show them what it means to invade Earth." The asteroid field came alive. What the Dominion had catalogued as lifeless rocks suddenly bristled with weapons. Railguns emerged from concealed ports, their barrels already trained on specific targets. Missile tubes opened like predatory flowers, revealing payloads that had been waiting decades for this moment. Point defense systems activated, creating an invisible web of overlapping fields of fire. And then, from 100 different positions simultaneously, humanity struck. The railguns fired first, accelerating tungsten penetrators to speeds that made them invisible to the naked eye. They crossed the distance to the Dominion fleet in seconds, and because the Arxelians had never encountered kinetic weapons of this caliber, their energy shields were configured all wrong. The penetrators punched through shield and hull like they weren't even there. The Dominion warship Crystalline Hammer died first, a 20-kilometer spike of tungsten entering through its forward section and exiting through its engineering spaces. The kinetic energy transfer reducing internal systems to shrapnel and crew to vapor. 3 more ships died in the same second, then 5 more, then 10. "Evasive maneuvers," Fornex screamed, watching in horror as his fleet began to die. "Return fire. Target the asteroids." The Dominion's energy weapons blazed, turning the void into a light show of destruction. Asteroids exploded into clouds of debris. Platforms were vaporized, but for every position they destroyed, 2 more opened fire. The humans had seeded the entire field with weapons, creating a kill zone that even a fleet of 500 couldn't quickly suppress. And then the missiles arrived. They came from Earth itself, launched from silos that had been carved into bedrock and waiting for centuries. Fusion warheads, each capable of reducing a city to plasma, mounted on delivery systems that wove through incoming fire with computerized precision. The Dominion's point defense systems, designed to intercept energy weapons and slower projectiles, couldn't track targets that moved this fast and this erratically. The first warhead detonated inside the Dominion formation, and a miniature sun bloomed in the void. Shields overloaded, hulls melted, crews died screaming as atmosphere vented into space. The shockwave threw nearby ships into each other, creating a cascade of collisions that destroyed vessels that had survived the initial blast. Fornex watched his fleet being dismantled with surgical precision, and understanding crashed down on him like a physical weight. These weren't primitive survivors clinging to life. These were predators who had spent millennia preparing for this exact scenario. "Retreat," he ordered. "All ships fall back to—" His words died as the Perseverance dropped her stealth and appeared directly behind his flagship, close enough that their hulls almost touched. At this range, shields were meaningless. At this range, there was no defense. Captain Chen stared through the view screen at the crystalline ship that dwarfed her own vessel. She thought of Earth burning under nuclear fire. She thought of billions of humans who had died. She thought of 50 million survivors who had spent 3,000 years hiding in the dark. Fire, she said. The Perseverance's main guns spoke at point-blank range, and the Dominion flagship Eternal Dominance broke apart like glass under a hammer. Debris scattered across space, each fragment carrying what remained of Vornex and his crew. The rest of the Dominion fleet panicked. They had never retreated before, never even conceived of defeat, but the mathematical reality was undeniable. They had lost over 100 ships in less than 10 minutes, and the humans showed no signs of slowing down. The surviving vessels turned and fled, their drives burning at maximum power. Desperate to escape the kill zone, the human weapons tracked them, firing until the last Dominion ship crossed out of effective range, and then finally fell silent. In the aftermath, the void was filled with debris and bodies. The Dominion had come with 500 warships and left with 347. 153 vessels destroyed, their crews dead, their mission an absolute failure. On Earth, in the command center beneath Sol, Commander Park allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 complete. They know we exist now. They know we can fight. Now comes the hard part. Captain Chen felt no satisfaction as she surveyed the wreckage. They'll come back. With more ships, more weapons. We hurt them, but we didn't break them. No, Park agreed. But we bought ourselves time. Time to prepare, time to plan, and time to send a message to the rest of the galaxy. That message was already being crafted by the Remnant's communications specialists. It would be transmitted on every major frequency, in every known language to every corner of civilized space. The content was simple, but its implications would shake the galaxy to its foundations. This is humanity speaking from the Sol system. For 3,000 years you believed us extinct. You were wrong. We survived. We endured. We prepared. To those species currently under Dominion occupation, you are not alone. To the Arxelian Dominion, leave our space and never return. To the galaxy at large, humanity has returned and we will not hide any longer. The message spread like wildfire across the communication networks that connected the civilized galaxy. On 1,000 worlds in 100 different languages, species heard the words and reacted with shock, disbelief, and in some cases, hope. On the Dominion homeworld of Arxelia, High Commander Zelthax received the news of the fleet's defeat with a rage that made his crystalline body vibrate with fury. No species had ever defeated a Dominion fleet. No species had ever dared to issue an ultimatum to the Empire. The humans had committed an unforgivable act, and they would pay for it with their extinction. Mobilize the war fleets, he commanded his sub-commanders. Every vessel we can spare, every weapon we possess. We will reduce the Sol system to debris. We will hunt down every human in the galaxy. We will make an example of them that will be remembered for 10,000 years. His subordinates rushed to carry out his orders, and within hours, the machinery of the Dominion's military was grinding into motion. Fleets from across their territory began moving toward a central assembly point. Ships that had been in dock for maintenance were rushed back into service. Weapons that had been in storage were brought online. The Dominion was preparing for total war, and when they struck, they would do so with overwhelming force. 10,000 warships, enough firepower to crack planets and boil oceans. The humans had won one battle through trickery and surprise. They would not win the war, but the Dominion made a critical error in their analysis. They assumed that the battle in Sol system represented the full extent of human military capability. They assumed that the weapons they had faced were the best humanity could deploy. They assumed that a species reduced to 50 million survivors couldn't possibly possess the resources for a prolonged conflict. They were wrong on every count. In the depths of Europa's subsurface ocean, in facilities that had been built over centuries of patient work, humanity's engineers were activating systems that they had prayed would never be needed. The Pandora protocols, weapons so terrible that even the humans who built them had hesitated to create them. Captain Chen stood in one of these facilities wearing a pressure suit against the crushing depth, staring at a weapon that made her blood run cold. It was a missile, but not like the fusion warheads they had used against the Dominion fleet. This one carried something far worse. A relativistic kill vehicle, the chief engineer explained, her voice crackling over the radio. We accelerate a 1,000-ton mass to 99% of light speed and aim it at a planet. The kinetic energy release is equivalent to a dinosaur-killer asteroid impact. Atmosphere ignites, crust fractures, the target world becomes uninhabitable for millennia. Chen felt sick. We built these? Our ancestors built them during the resource wars, the engineer replied. Back when we thought the only thing worse than dying was letting the other side win. We've maintained them, improved them, but we've never used them. Commander Park wants you to understand what we're capable of, what we're willing to do. This is madness, Chen said. If we use these, we're no better than the Dominion. No, the engineer corrected. If we use these on innocent worlds, we're no better than the Dominion. But if we use them on Dominion military targets, on their war fleets and their staging bases, then we're simply doing what we must to survive. Chen understood the logic, but it didn't make her feel any better. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself with weapons like these. Now they were preparing to use them against an alien empire. History repeating itself just on a larger scale. Back on the Perseverance, her crew was dealing with their own moral struggles. They had left Earth to escape the wars, to build something better among the stars. Now they found themselves at the center of a conflict that could span the galaxy. Lieutenant Morrison approached Chen in her ready room, his face troubled. Captain, I need to ask you something. Are we doing the right thing? We fired first on that Dominion fleet. We didn't try to negotiate, didn't attempt any diplomatic solution. We just killed them. Chen looked at the young officer, seeing in him the idealism that had driven the Exodus fleet. The belief that humanity could be better, could rise above its violent nature. The Dominion's first message to us was a demand for surrender, she said quietly. Not a request for dialogue, not an offer of coexistence. Surrender or be destroyed. That's not a civilization we can negotiate with. That's a predator, and predators only understand one language. But where does it end? Morrison pressed. We kill them, they kill us, back and forth until one side is extinct. It ends when they leave us alone, Chen replied. When they learn that the cost of conquering humanity is too high to pay. We're not fighting to destroy them. We're fighting to make them stop fighting us. Morrison nodded slowly, not entirely convinced but willing to trust her judgment. He left, and Chen was alone with her thoughts. She pulled up the casualty reports from the battle. The Dominion had lost over 100,000 crew members killed in the space of minutes. The humans had lost 4 weapons platforms and 317 personnel. It was a lopsided victory by any measure, but Chen felt no triumph, only the weight of all those deaths, human and alien alike. War had found humanity again, just as it always did. The only question now was whether they could win it without losing themselves in the process. In the command center on Earth, Commander Park was coordinating with military leaders across all 3 human-inhabited worlds. They had inflicted a stinging defeat on the Dominion, but the response would be massive. They needed to be ready. We can't fight them ship to ship, Park said to the assembled officers. Even with our technology, they outnumber us 1,000 to 1. We need to fight smart, fight dirty, use every advantage we have. An officer from the Mars garrison spoke up. What about the other species under Dominion control? The message said hundreds of civilizations have been conquered. Could we find allies? Park nodded. Already working on it. We're sending covert communications to resistance movements across Dominion space. If we can get them to revolt, to strike at the Dominion from within, it might buy us the time we need. And if they come at us with everything they have? Asked another officer. If they commit their full military to destroying us? Park's expression grew hard. Then we activate the Scorched Earth Protocol. If we can't win, we make sure the cost of defeating us destroys them too. Mutually assured destruction, Galaxy Edition. The room fell silent. The Scorched Earth Protocol was the ultimate deterrent, the final card humanity could play. If the Dominion threatened Earth itself, humanity would unleash weapons that could sterilize entire systems, render whole regions of space uninhabitable. It was insanity, but it was also the only leverage a species of 50 million had against an empire of trillions. Captain Chen would later learn of these discussions, these terrible calculations of acceptable losses and necessary evils. She would understand that the Remnant had spent 3,000 years preparing not just to fight, but to fight in ways that would horrify their enemies into submission. Humanity had learned through bitter experience that sometimes the only way to prevent war was to be so terrifying that no one dared to start one. The Dominion was about to get a comprehensive education in that philosophy. The Dominion's response took 6 weeks to assemble, and when it came with the full weight of their empire behind it. 10,000 warships, drawn from every corner of their territory, each one crewed by soldiers who had never known defeat. High Commander Zelthax personally led the armada, standing on the bridge of the super dreadnought Final Judgment, a vessel so massive it could serve as a mobile command base for entire fleets. "We will make an example of the humans," Zelthax announced to his commanders via fleet-wide transmission. "Every ship destroyed, every installation reduced to rubble, every human hunted down and eliminated. The galaxy will learn what happens to species that defy the Dominion." The fleet moved through space like a swarm of glittering locusts, and every species that detected their passage felt fear. This was the Dominion at full war, something most civilizations only saw in the moments before their own subjugation. But while the Dominion fleet advanced, humanity was not idle. Captain Chen stood in the command center on Europa, now serving as humanity's forward military headquarters. Around her, holographic displays showed the entire Sol system, marked with defensive positions, weapons platforms, and the slow-moving approach of the Dominion Armada. "They're not trying to hide," Commander Park observed. "They want us to see them coming. Psychological warfare trying to make us panic." "Is it working?" Chen asked. Park smiled grimly. "On some people, yes. But fear can be useful if you channel it properly. Every human in this system knows what's coming. They're motivated." Chen studied the tactical displays. The numbers were worse than she had imagined. 10,000 warships against humanity's few dozen combat vessels. Even with all their defensive platforms and hidden weapons, the odds were impossible. "We can't win this conventionally," she said. "No," Park agreed. "Which is why we're not going to fight conventionally. Tell me, Captain, what do you know about asymmetric warfare?" Over the next hours, Park laid out the plan, and with each detail, Chen felt both horror and admiration. The HFY remnant had spent millennia studying warfare, and they had learned lessons from every conflict in human history. The American Revolution, where guerrilla fighters defeated a superior force. The Vietnam War, where knowledge of terrain trumped technological advantage. The cyber wars of the early 21st century, where information was as deadly as any bullet. Humanity was going to fight the Dominion using every dirty trick, every unconventional tactic, every psychological weapon they had developed over 10,000 years of killing each other. The first phase began before the Dominion fleet even reached the outer system. Human cyber warfare specialists working from hardened bunkers on Earth launched a massive hacking assault on the Dominion's communication networks. They had captured enough of the alien technology during the first battle to understand its basic architecture, and now they exploited every vulnerability they could find. On board the Final Judgment, Zelthax's communications officer reported growing problems. "High Commander, we're experiencing widespread interference across all channels. Ships are receiving contradictory orders. Sensor data is corrupted. Tactical updates are failing to transmit." "Impossible," Zelthax snapped. "Our communication systems are unhackable. They're built on quantum encrypted channels." "Nevertheless, someone is disrupting them," the officer insisted. "And it's getting worse." What the officer didn't know, what the entire Dominion fleet didn't realize, was that the humans had done something unprecedented. They had created an artificial intelligence specifically designed for electronic warfare, and they had set it loose in the Dominion's networks like a virus. The AI called itself Loki, named after an ancient human god of mischief. It didn't just disrupt communications. It learned, adapted, and actively deceived. It sent false sensor readings to Dominion ships, making them see threats that didn't exist. It rerouted orders, sending vessels to wrong coordinates. It even began broadcasting fake messages from Zelthax himself, creating confusion and doubt throughout the fleet. By the time the Dominion entered the outer system, their formation was in disarray, ships scattered across millions of kilometers as they tried to regroup and verify actual orders from false ones. "This is intolerable," Zelthax roared. "Shut down all automated systems. Go to manual communication only. We'll coordinate by laser link if necessary." It was the right tactical decision, but it slowed the fleet's response time to a crawl, and that was exactly what the humans wanted. The second phase began as the Dominion fleet approached Jupiter's orbit. Hidden among the gas giant's dozens of moons were weapons platforms that the Remnant had spent centuries building. As the alien vessels passed within range, these platforms launched their payloads, but they weren't ordinary missiles. They were mines, thousands of them, each one coated with the same stealth material that had hidden the human ships. They scattered across the Dominion's projected path and then went dormant, indistinguishable from space debris. The Dominion fleet plowed straight into the minefield. The explosions began as proximity sensors detected the massive alien ships. Each mine carried a fusion warhead, and they detonated in clusters, creating overlapping kill zones. Shields flared and failed under the sustained assault. Hulls fractured, ships died. But the mines weren't designed to destroy the fleet. They were designed to wound it, to force the Dominion to slow down, to waste time and resources clearing a path forward. Every hour the fleet spent dealing with the mines was another hour for humanity to prepare. Zelthax watched his casualty counts climb and felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. The humans weren't fighting like any species he had encountered. They didn't meet force with force. They nibbled at the edges, struck from ambush, used weapons that seemed designed more to frustrate than to kill. "They're trying to wear us down," he said to his tactical officer. "Trying to make us expend resources before the main engagement." "Should we withdraw?" the officer asked cautiously. "Withdraw?" Zelthax turned on him with fury crackling through his voice. "Retreat from a species of primitives? Never. Press forward. We'll crush them under the weight of our numbers." But the humans had more surprises waiting. As the Dominion fleet cleared the minefield and advanced toward the inner system, they received an unexpected transmission. It came from a Dominion vessel, one of their own warships, broadcasting on their secure frequencies with proper authentication codes. "All ships, this is Captain Vexer of the Righteous Fury," the message said. "We have discovered a human weakness. They cannot detect our vessels if we approach from the plane of the system's ecliptic. Recommend fleet pivot to attack Vector Delta 73. It was completely fabricated, a message created by Loki and transmitted using communication protocols stolen from captured Dominion systems. But the authentication codes were perfect, and in the confusion of the ongoing cyber warfare, no one thought to verify. A third of the fleet changed course, moving out of the plane of the solar system to attack from what they believed was a blind spot. It scattered the fleet even further, and when those ships finally reached their new positions, they found nothing but empty space and more mines. By the time Zelthax realized they had been deceived, the fleet was divided into 3 separate groups, each one vulnerable, each one isolated from mutual support. "Regroup immediately," he commanded. "All ships fall back to Formation Bravo." But the humans were already moving to the 3rd phase of their plan. From hidden launch sites on Mars, from concealed positions in the asteroid belt, from platforms that had been drifting dark and cold for decades, humanity unleashed their most devastating weapons. The relativistic kill vehicles, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, streaked across the solar system faster than any defense could track. The first RKV hit the Dominion cruiser Crystal Spear amidships, and the kinetic energy release was catastrophic. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the impact along with everything within 1,000 kilometers. The shockwave of superheated plasma expanded outward, catching 3 nearby vessels and reducing them to molten debris. More RKVs followed, each one targeted at the largest concentrations of Dominion ships. The aliens tried to evade, but at these speeds, by the time their sensors detected the incoming projectiles, it was already too late. Ship after ship died, and the Dominion's numerical advantage began to erode. "How many of those weapons do they have?" Zelthax demanded, watching his fleet being systematically dismantled. "Unknown, High Commander," his tactical officer replied. "But at this rate of fire, they must be expending their entire stockpile." Zelthax made a quick calculation. The humans were using weapons that cost tremendous resources to build and deploy. They had to be running out. If the Dominion could survive this initial barrage, they would still have enough ships to overwhelm Earth's defenses. "All vessels, maximum defensive posture," he commanded. "Increase shield output, activate all point defense systems. We weather this storm and then we strike back with everything we have." It was the correct tactical response. The Dominion fleet consolidated, ships moving into mutually supporting formations, creating overlapping shield bubbles that could absorb tremendous punishment. The RKV strikes continued, but now they were less effective. The kinetic energy dispersed across multiple shield layers. The barrage lasted for 30 minutes, and when it finally stopped, the Dominion had lost another 800 ships. But they still had over 8,000 remaining, and they were now close enough to Earth to begin their own bombardment. "Target the third planet," Zelthax ordered. "Prepare to commence orbital bombardment. We will burn their cities, boil their oceans, and leave nothing but ash." On Earth, in the command center, alarms were blaring as every screen showed the same terrible truth. The Dominion fleet was in range. The bombardment would begin within minutes. Even with all their preparations, all their tricks, humanity was out of time. Commander Park looked at Captain Chen, and she saw acceptance in his eyes. They had fought well, hurt the Dominion badly, but it wasn't enough. The end was coming. But then Lieutenant Morrison spoke up from his station, his voice shaking with excitement. "Captain! Commander! I'm detecting new contacts. Multiple ships entering the system from deep space." Chen rushed to his station. "Dominion reinforcements?" "No, ma'am," Morrison said, and now he was smiling. "The signature matches Exodus fleet specifications. It's the other colony ships. They're waking up." On every screen, across every sensor, the same impossible truth became clear. Humanity had sent out dozens of colony ships during the resource wars, each one carrying thousands of people in cryosleep, each one programmed to wake at different intervals to maximize the chance that some would survive. The Battle in Sol system had triggered ancient failsafes, automated distress signals that had been propagating across space at light speed for the past 6 weeks. The other Exodus ships had received those signals, and their AI systems had made a simple calculation. Earth needed help. It was time to wake up. 23 ships appeared from deep space, each one an echo of the Perseverance, each one carrying thousands of humans who had left Earth millennia ago. They had been traveling to distant stars, spreading humanity across the galaxy, but now they turned back, converging on their homeworld in its darkest hour. Captain Maria Rodriguez of the New Dawn was the first to make contact, her voice carrying across the communication channels with fierce determination. "This is the Exodus fleet. We heard Earth's call. We're coming home, and God help anyone who stands in our way." 23 ships carrying over 40,000 people, armed with weapons built during humanity's most desperate age. They weren't a match for 8,000 Dominion warships, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to tip the balance. "All human vessels," Chen transmitted. "Coordinate firing solutions with Earth defense. Target the Dominion flagship. Let's show High Commander Zelthax what it means to threaten our species." What followed was the most desperate battle in human history. The Exodus fleet crashed into the Dominion formation like a tidal wave, guns blazing, missiles flying, ships dying on both sides in the hundreds. The void lit up with nuclear fire and energy beams, with kinetic strikes and exploding reactors. The Perseverance led the charge, Chen pushing her engines past Redline, racing toward the super dreadnought Final Judgment. Around her, human ships died, their crews sacrificing themselves to clear a path. On the Dominion flagship, Zelthax finally understood the truth. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to make the cost of victory unbearable. Every human ship that died took 3 or 4 Dominion vessels with them. Every human position that fell did so only after inflicting devastating casualties. "High Commander," his tactical officer said quietly, "at current loss rates, even if we win, we'll have less than 1,000 ships remaining. The Empire needs those vessels for other fronts. We're expending our entire strategic reserve on a single system." Zelthax stared at the tactical display. The humans had just over 60 ships now, counting the new arrivals. The Dominion still had over 7,000. Victory was certain, but it would cost them everything. For the first time in Dominion history, High Commander Zelthax gave an order he never thought he would speak. "All ships, cease fire. Withdraw to defensive positions." The battle stopped as suddenly as it had begun, both sides pulling back, weapons still charged but no longer firing. In the silence that followed, a communication came from the Perseverance. Captain Chen's face appeared on Zelthax's screen, and he was shocked by what he saw. She was young for a human, covered in blood from wounds she hadn't bothered to treat, but her eyes were absolutely cold, absolutely certain. "You wanted to talk, High Commander?" she said. "Then talk. But make it quick." My people are dying and my patience is running out. High Commander Zelthak studied the human commander on his screen. This creature who had inflicted more damage on the Dominion in a matter of weeks than any species had managed in centuries. She looked fragile, her biological form so easily damaged, yet her resolve was as hard as any crystalline structure he had ever seen. You cannot win, Zelthak said, stating what he believed to be mathematical fact. We still outnumber you more than 100 to 1. We can absorb these losses and continue. Can you? Chen smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Let me tell you something about humanity, High Commander. We're the species that nearly wiped itself out and still survived. We're the species that spent 3,000 years hiding underground, preparing for a war we hoped would never come. We're the species that will burn our own worlds to ash before we let conquerors take them. She leaned forward, and Zelthak saw absolute conviction in her eyes. You can kill us. You probably will if you keep fighting, but the cost will break your empire. Every ship you lose here is one you can't use to hold your conquered territories. Every soldier who dies is one less garrison trooper. And the species you've subjugated are watching this battle, High Commander. They're watching humans fight against impossible odds, and they're wondering if they could do the same. Zelthax felt a chill run through his crystalline structure. She was right. The Dominion's power rested on the perception of invincibility, on the belief that resistance was futile. The humans had shattered that perception. Even if the Dominion destroyed them utterly, the damage was done. What do you want? He asked. Leave, Chen said simply. Withdraw your forces from Sol system and never return. Recognize human sovereignty over our claimed space, and release any species in your territory that wishes to be free. Impossible, Zelthax replied immediately. The Dominion does not negotiate with conquered species. We do not retreat. Then we activate Protocol Scorched Earth, Chen said calmly. We have weapons in position that will render this entire system uninhabitable. Relativistic kill vehicles aimed at every planet, including our own. Nuclear devices buried in Earth's crust that will trigger volcanic eruptions across the globe. Antimatter bombs in the asteroid belt that will turn it into an expanding cloud of high-velocity shrapnel. If we can't have our home system, no one can. She paused, letting that sink in. And we have more. Sleeper agents on your supply routes. Cyber weapons ready to corrupt your communication networks across the Empire. We've spent 6 weeks mapping your infrastructure, High Commander. We know where your shipyards are, where your resource extraction facilities operate, where your food production centers exist. If you force us to extinction, we'll spend our last moments making sure the Dominion follows us into the void. Zelthax realized with growing horror that she meant every word. These humans would absolutely destroy themselves and take as much of the Dominion with them as possible. It wasn't rational. It wasn't logical. It was insanity. But it was also effective. I need to consult with the High Council, Zelthax said finally. You have 12 hours, Chen replied. After that, we assume you've chosen extinction for both our species. The transmission ended and Zelthax was left staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited in tense silence, waiting for orders that would determine the fate of the Empire. On Earth, in the command center, Chen collapsed into a chair the moment the transmission ended. Her wounds, which she had been ignoring through sheer force of will, suddenly demanded attention. Medics rushed forward, but she waved them off. Commander Park, she said, would we really do it? Would we really activate Scorched Earth? Park was silent for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. The protocols exist. The weapons are in place. But whether the Council of Survivors would actually give that order, whether humanity would choose mutual extinction over surrender, he shook his head. I hope we never have to find out. The next 12 hours were the longest in human history. Both fleets remained in position, weapons charged but silent. On Earth and Mars and Europa, in underground cities and hidden installations, 50 million humans waited to learn if they would survive to see another day. In the Exodus fleet ships, the awakened colonists tried to process everything that had happened. They had left Earth expecting to build new civilizations on distant worlds. Instead, they had awakened to find their species nearly extinct, their homeworld a graveyard, and themselves in the middle of a war against an alien empire. Captain Rodriguez of the New Dawn met with her senior staff, all of them struggling with the same questions. Did we do the right thing? Asked her first officer. We abandoned our original colonies, left them to survive or die on their own to come back and fight this war. The colonies have AI and automation, Rodriguez replied. They'll establish themselves whether we're there or not. But Earth, our species, was in danger. Where else would we go? It was a sentiment echoed across all 23 Exodus ships. Whatever their original missions, whatever dreams they had carried into the stars, Earth called and they answered. Because in the end, humans always came home. On the Dominion flagship, Zelthax stood before a holographic projection of the High Council, the 12 supreme commanders who ruled the Empire. He had presented his case, laid out the tactical situation, explained the costs of continuing the war. This is unprecedented, said Council Leader Vexarion, her crystalline voice carrying across light years through quantum communication. The Dominion has never withdrawn from a conquest. If we do so now, it will be seen as weakness. With respect, Council Leader, Zelthax replied, continuing the war will also be seen as weakness. We have lost over 3,000 ships fighting a species of barely 60 million individuals. The mathematics of it are humiliating, and the humans are correct in their assessment. Every species we have subjugated is watching. If we show that determined resistance can stop the Dominion, rebellions will ignite across the Empire. Then we must crush the humans utterly. Another council member argued. Make an example so terrible that no one dares to resist. To do so will require committing our entire military, Zelthax countered. Every ship, every soldier, every resource. And the humans will make us pay for every meter of ground. Their entire philosophy of warfare is based on making the cost unbearable. They will activate their doomsday weapons. They will render entire systems uninhabitable. And even if we win, we will be so weakened that the other great powers in the galaxy will move against us. The council debated for hours, arguments flowing back and forth with the speed of crystalline thought. The Empire had never faced this kind of choice before. Every previous conquest had been straightforward. Overwhelming force, quick victory, assimilation of the conquered species. But humanity was different. They didn't fight like rational beings. They fought like cornered predators, willing to destroy themselves if it meant taking their enemies with them. Finally, Council Leader Vexarion spoke. We will offer terms. The Dominion withdraws from the Sol system. Humans are recognized as a sovereign species. In exchange, they agree to not interfere with Dominion territory and to not spread their weapons technology to other species. And the release of conquered species? Zelthax asked. Non-negotiable, Vexarion said firmly. We cannot appear to be capitulating to all their demands, but we will offer clemency to any species that wishes to leave voluntarily, and we will not pursue them if they choose to do so. It was a compromise, a way to save face while still retreating. Zelthax recognized it for what it was, the first crack in the Dominion's facade of invincibility. But it was better than the alternative. When the 12 hours expired, Zelthax contacted Captain Chen again. The High Council has considered your terms. We are prepared to withdraw from Sol system and recognize human sovereignty. In exchange, you will agree to non-interference in Dominion space and will not distribute your weapons technology to other species. Chen felt relief wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. What about the release of conquered species? Species in Dominion territory may petition for independence, Zelthax said carefully. We will not prevent their departure, but we will not actively release them either. They must choose freedom for themselves. It wasn't everything Chen had demanded, but it was more than she had expected to get. Acceptable. We'll draft a formal treaty and transmit it within the hour. The treaty was signed 2 days later in neutral space, with both fleets still in position, but weapons powered down. It was a simple document, barely 3 pages, but its implications would reshape the galaxy. The Dominion fleet withdrew over the following week, ships limping back to their territory to lick their wounds. They left behind over 3,000 dead vessels, a monument to the price of underestimating humanity. As the last Dominion ship crossed out of the Sol system, Captain Chen stood on the observation deck of the Perseverance, watching them go. Commander Park stood beside her, both of them exhausted beyond measure but unable to rest quite yet. We won, Park said quietly. Against all odds, we actually won. We survived, Chen corrected. Winning would mean we didn't lose 15,000 people in the process. The human casualties had been devastating. Nearly a quarter of the Exodus fleet had been destroyed. Weapons platforms and defensive installations all across the system were reduced to debris. The cost of victory would take generations to fully calculate, But they had survived. Humanity still existed. Earth was still theirs. Over the following months, the galaxy watched with fascination as humanity emerged from the shadows. The other Exodus ships, hearing of the war, began waking from their long sleep and returning home. Each ship brought thousands of people, fresh genetic diversity, new perspectives. The population of human space began to grow. Colonies were established on the outer planets. The asteroid belt became a vast industrial complex. Mars's underground cities expanded to the surface for the first time in millennia. And the message that Chen had sent, the declaration that humanity would not hide anymore, had been heard across the galaxy. Species under Dominion control began to rebel, inspired by the example of these strange bipedal creatures who had fought an empire to a standstill. The Arxelian Dominion found itself fighting brushfire wars across its territory, each rebellion drawing resources, each conflict weakening their grip. The empire that had seemed invincible was suddenly vulnerable, and everyone could see it. 1 year after the battle, representatives from 17 different species arrived at Earth, requesting diplomatic contact. They were species that had recently gained their independence from the Dominion, and they wanted to meet the humans who had made it possible. Captain Chen, now promoted to admiral and serving as humanity's first ambassador, met with them in a conference center that had been hastily constructed in orbit around Earth. "We want to form an alliance," said Ambassador Kelrix of the Thanid people, a reptilian species who had been under Dominion rule for 4 centuries. "The Dominion is weakened but not broken. They will rebuild, and when they do, they will seek revenge. We need to stand together." Chen considered the proposal carefully. An alliance meant commitments, obligations, the risk of being drawn into other people's wars, but it also meant strength in numbers, mutual defense, the possibility of creating something better than empire. "The Terran Accord," she said finally, "a defensive pact. We don't seek to conquer or expand. We defend each other against those who would enslave us. We share technology, resources, knowledge. We stand together or we fall alone." The other species agreed, and the Terran Accord was born. It started with 18 species, but over the following years more joined. Some were former Dominion subjects. Others were independent worlds who had watched the war and decided they wanted to be on humanity's side. The Accord didn't seek to replace the Dominion as a galactic power. It sought to create something different, a federation of free species, each one maintaining their sovereignty, each one committed to mutual defense, and at the center of it all was Earth, the world that had nearly destroyed itself and somehow survived. The humans, the species that every historical record had listed as extinct, now stood as a beacon of resistance against tyranny. In the Dominion capital, historians updated humanity's file one final time. The designation "the First Fallen" was removed. In its place, a new notation was added, one that would be studied by Dominion strategists for generations to come. Humanity, the last species you want to challenge. The file included detailed analysis of human tactics, psychology, and philosophy of warfare. It noted their willingness to embrace mutually assured destruction, their capacity for deception and unconventional warfare, their absolute refusal to submit even in the face of impossible odds. It became required reading for every Dominion officer, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating an opponent based on their appearance or numbers. 5 years after the war, Captain Sarah Chen retired from military service and returned to the Perseverance. The old colony ship had been converted into a museum, a monument to the journey that had carried 300 humans across the millennia and brought them home just in time to save their species. She walked through the corridors where her crew had fought and died, touching the bulkheads that still bore scorch marks from that desperate battle. In the captain's ready room, now preserved exactly as it had been, she found a memorial wall where the names of every human who died in the war had been engraved. 15,000 names. 15,000 people who would never see the world they saved. Chen placed her hand on the wall, feeling the weight of memory. "We made it," she whispered to the dead. "We survived. We're building something new, something better. I hope you'd be proud." Outside the museum, Earth was alive with construction. Cities were rising from the underground warrens, reaching toward a sky that was finally safe to live beneath. Ships moved in constant traffic between Earth and Mars and the outer colonies. And in orbit, New defensive platforms were being built, newer and more powerful than the ones that had been destroyed. Humanity would never hide again. They would never again assume that isolation meant safety. The galaxy knew they existed now, and the galaxy would have to deal with them. On Mars, in the rebuilt command center, Commander Park stood before a holographic display of known space. The Dominion's territory was marked in red, still vast but no longer expanding. The Terran Accord's space was marked in blue, a growing constellation of allied worlds. "What are you thinking?" asked his second-in-command. Park smiled. "I'm thinking about what my great-great-grandmother used to say. She survived the nuclear war, lived through the worst of the aftermath. She used to tell me that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our weapons, it was our refusal to accept extinction." He gestured at the display. "We were down to 50 million people, hiding in the dark, convinced that the galaxy was full of predators. We could have stayed hidden forever, slowly dying out in our underground cities. Instead, we chose to fight. We chose to risk everything for the chance at freedom. And now?" his second asked. "Now we build, we grow. We make sure that no species ever has to face what we faced alone. The Dominion taught the galaxy to fear conquest. We'll teach them to hope for something better." Far across the galaxy, in regions still unexplored by the Terran Accord, other Exodus ships were waking. Humanity's seeds, scattered across the stars during Earth's darkest hour, were finally germinating. Each ship carried thousands of people, each one a piece of humanity's legacy. They woke to find messages from Earth, recordings of the war, explanations of everything that had happened. And one by one they made their choices. Some continued to their intended destinations, establishing colonies on distant worlds. Others turned back toward Sul, wanting to be part of humanity's resurgence. But all of them carried the same message forward into the unknown. Humanity survived, humanity endured, and humanity would never ever give up. On Earth, in a park that had been built over the ruins of Old Sol, a monument stood. It was simple, a statue of a human figure, face upturned to the stars, one hand extended in greeting, the other holding a weapon at their side. The inscription at its base read, "We survived ourselves. We survived the flames of our own making. We survived 3,000 years in darkness. We survived against an empire that thought us extinct." The galaxy didn't stand a chance. Below it, in smaller letters, was a quote attributed to Captain Sarah Chen. "They believed we were extinct. They were wrong. We were never dead. We were just preparing." 10 years after the war, the first Terran Accord summit was held on Earth. Representatives from 43 species gathered in Geneva, in a building constructed specifically for this purpose. The architecture blended elements from every member civilization, creating something unique and beautiful. Admiral Chen, now serving as Earth's senior diplomat, stood before the assembly and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "We came together because we shared a common enemy. We stay together because we share a common dream. A galaxy where species are free to choose their own destiny, where strength is measured not by how many worlds you conquer, but by how many allies you can call friends, where diversity is celebrated, not crushed under the boot of empire." She paused, looking at the assembled representatives, beings of crystal and flesh, of metal and energy, of forms so alien that humans still struggled to understand them. All of them here because they had chosen freedom over subjugation. "The Dominion still exists," Chen continued. "They still hold vast territories. They still pose a threat, but they learned something important when they came to Sol System. They learned that conquest has a price, and sometimes that price is too high to pay. They learned that even the smallest species, even the weakest civilization, can become your worst nightmare if they're desperate enough and determined enough." She smiled. "Humanity didn't beat the Dominion through superior firepower or advanced technology. We beat them through sheer stubbornness, through a refusal to accept that bigger always wins, through our willingness to fight dirty, to use every advantage to make them regret ever hearing our name." The assembly erupted in applause, various species expressing approval in their own unique ways. The Thanid hissed and stamped their feet. The Vorlax pulsed with bioluminescence. The crystalline confederacy resonated at frequencies that made the air vibrate. In the Dominion capital, High Commander Zelthax watched a recording of the summit with weary resignation. He had been demoted after the Sol campaign, relegated to an administrative position far from active military command. His replacement had orders to avoid human space entirely unless absolutely necessary. The Empire was changing. The rebellions inspired by humanity's resistance had cost them a quarter of their territory. The military was stretched thin, fighting on a dozen fronts, and morale was at an all-time low. Soldiers who had never known defeat were now questioning whether the Dominion's way was the right way. Zelthax had spent the years since the war studying everything they had captured about human history. He wanted to understand what made them so dangerous, so capable of defying logic and probability. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humanity's history was an unbroken chain of warfare, conflict, and destruction. They had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. Every weapon the Dominion faced in Sol system had been originally designed for human-on-human combat. The tactics they employed had been refined through centuries of bitter experience. The Dominion had never fought a species like this because no other species had this kind of history. Most civilizations developed warfare as an occasional necessity, something used sparingly against external threats. Humans had made it an art form, a science, a fundamental aspect of their cultural identity. They didn't just know how to fight, they knew how to fight dirty. Zelthax wrote a report for the High Council outlining his findings. The conclusion was stark. The Dominion should avoid conflict with humanity at all costs. We cannot match their capacity for violence, their willingness to embrace destruction, or their ability to turn any situation into a battlefield.
They are not conquerors like us.
They are survivors, and survivors are infinitely more dangerous. The report was filed and largely ignored. The Dominion's leadership couldn't accept that a species of bipedal mammals could be this threatening. But the military commanders, the ones who had actually fought humans or studied the battles, they understood. A new doctrine emerged in Dominion military academies. When dealing with humans, exhaust all diplomatic options first. Back on Earth, life continued its slow return to normalcy. The underground cities remained, now serving as industrial centers and historical sites rather than hiding places. Surface cities grew, expanding across continents that had been dead for millennia. The cleanup of radioactive zones was a generational project, but humanity had time now. They had survived the worst. They could handle the rebuilding. Captain Maria Rodriguez of the New Dawn had settled on Mars, where she helped establish the first permanent surface colony. She often thought about the colonists she had left behind on the distant world they were supposed to reach, wondering if they had survived, if they were thriving. One day, 15 years after the war, she got her answer. A message arrived from deep space, transmitted on old Exodus fleet frequencies. It was from the New Dawn's intended colony, a world they had named Haven. The automated systems had successfully established the settlement, and the colonists who arrived later from other ships had found a thriving community. But more importantly, they had found something else. Evidence of an ancient civilization, ruins scattered across the planet that suggested Haven had once been home to a species that destroyed itself in nuclear war thousands of years before humans arrived. The colonists had learned from both examples, from the species that failed to survive, and from humanity that did. They were building something different, something better, a society that learned from history's mistakes. Rodriguez wept when she read the message, tears of joy and relief. The mission hadn't failed. The seeds humanity had planted across the stars were growing, each one becoming something unique, something wonderful. She sent a message back, telling them about Earth's war, about the Terran Accord, about humanity's return to the galactic stage. And she told them they were always welcome to return home, but that building their own future was just as important. The colonies became part of the Accord, linked by communication, but independent in governance. Humanity was no longer a single species on a single world. They were a diaspora, spread across hundreds of light years, each community adding their own flavor to what it meant to be human. 20 years after the war, the first joint Terran Accord military exercises were held in the outer reaches of Sol system. Ships from 24 species maneuvered together, testing communication protocols and tactical coordination. Admiral Chen watched from the bridge of the Defender of Earth, a warship built specifically to incorporate the lessons learned from the Dominion conflict. She was 78 years old now, her body aging but her mind still sharp. Beside her stood a young officer, Lieutenant James Morrison, son of the Morrison who had served on the Perseverance. He represented the new generation, Humans born after the war who knew the galaxy as a place of both danger and opportunity. What do you think they would say? Morrison asked, gesturing at the fleet. The people who left Earth during the resource wars, who went into cryo-sleep thinking humanity was doomed. What would they think of all this? Chen smiled. I think they'd be proud. We didn't just survive. We thrived. We took the worst aspects of our nature, the violence and the stubbornness and the refusal to quit, and we channeled them into something positive. Do you ever regret it? Morrison asked. The war, the killing, all the people who died? Every single day, Chen admitted. But I don't regret fighting. The Dominion gave us a choice, surrender or resist. We chose resistance, and yes, it cost us dearly. But the alternative was extinction or slavery, and humanity has never been good at accepting either. She looked at the young officer. Your generation gets to build the peace we fought for. Don't waste it. Make something worth all those lives we lost. Morrison nodded solemnly. We will. I promise. Far across the galaxy in regions the Terran Accord had not yet explored, the Dominion's enemies watched with great interest. Species that had fought the Arxelians to stalemates in the past, civilizations that had resisted empire through strength rather than submission. They had heard of humanity, they had studied the war, and they were impressed. Diplomatic overtures began arriving at Earth, requests for contact from species whose names humans had never heard. The galaxy was larger than anyone had imagined, and humanity was just beginning to understand their place in it. Some of these civilizations offered trade, others offered alliance. A few offered warnings about threats that neither humanity nor the Dominion had yet encountered. The galaxy was not a safe place, and there were dangers far worse than empire-building crystalline aliens. But humanity had learned the most important lesson. They were not alone, and they did not have to face the universe by themselves. 30 years after the war, on the anniversary of the first battle, a ceremony was held in Earth orbit at the site where the Perseverance had first engaged the Dominion fleet. A memorial station had been built there, incorporating pieces of destroyed ships from both sides. Admiral Sarah Chen, now 93 years old and confined to a wheelchair, gave what would be her final public address. We gather here to remember, she said, her voice still strong despite her frail body. To remember the dead, human and alien alike. To remember the cost of war and the price of freedom. To remember that we are capable of terrible things but also of incredible things. She gestured at the memorial. This station stands at the place where humanity announced itself to the galaxy, not with words but with weapons, not with peace but with violence. Some say we should be ashamed of that we should have found another way. She shook her head. But there was no other way. The Dominion doesn't negotiate with equals, only with threats. We became that threat. We showed them and the entire galaxy that humanity, despite our small numbers and fragile bodies, was not to be trifled with. But we also showed something else. We showed that resistance was possible, that empires could be challenged, that freedom was worth fighting for, worth dying for, and because we fought, because we refused to submit, 43 other species found the courage to do the same. She paused, tears streaming down her weathered face. So yes, we remember the violence, but we also remember what came after. The peace, the alliance, the future we built together. We remember that humanity's greatest achievement was not destroying our enemies, but turning them into neighbors, not conquering the galaxy, but teaching it that there was an alternative to conquest. Chen died 3 months later, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. Her funeral was attended by representatives from every Accord species, and her name was added to the memorial alongside the 15,000 who fell in the war. But her legacy lived on. The Terran Accord continued to grow. Humanity spread further into the stars, and the lesson she taught, that even the smallest species could shape the galaxy if they were brave enough to try, became a foundational principle of the new galactic order. The Dominion still existed, diminished but not destroyed. They ruled their remaining territory with the same iron fist, but they no longer expanded unchecked. They had learned caution, learned that every conquest carried risk, and they never ever forgot the lesson that humanity taught them. In the archives of Arxelia, accessible to anyone who wished to study military history, there was a file. It was labeled simply, "The species that should have been extinct." Inside was everything the Dominion had learned about humanity. Every tactic they employed, every weapon they deployed, every psychological trick they used. It was studied by every military academy student, analyzed by every strategic planner, and at the very end, in bold text that could not be missed, was a simple warning. If you encounter humans in the field and they offer terms, take them. If they offer peace, accept it. If they offer anything other than total war, agree immediately. Because if you push them to the point where they have nothing left to lose, they will take you with them into the void. They are the species that nearly destroyed themselves and survived. Do not give them a reason to apply those same principles to you. The galaxy had changed. The age of unchallenged empire was over. In its place was something messier, more chaotic, but also more free. Species chose their own destinies now, for better or worse. And at the center of it all, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, humanity looked to the stars and smiled. They had come so close to extinction, had walked to the very edge of the abyss and stared into it. But they had stepped back. They had survived, and they had shown the galaxy that even the last remnants of a dying species could change the course of history. The monument in Seoul still stood and will stand for generations to come. People from across the Accord came to see it, to read its inscription, to understand what it meant. We survived ourselves. The galaxy didn't stand a chance. It was a boast, but it was also a promise. Humanity would endure, not through hiding, not through submission, but through the same stubborn refusal to quit that had carried them through 10,000 years of history. They were the species that challenged the galaxy and won, and they would never let anyone forget it.